I guess as the timeline goes, who could be maybe the next one to pop?
Yeah, and like you said, that's where it kind of goes back to the OVs. A lot of these kids make you feel good, Malik Morris, a lot of these guys, but then it's like, man, we're already almost getting into May, and
Right.
you would just think, hey, unless something popped open, we're like, hey, we need you to commit. We're going to get another kid, commit now. I just don't see it. I mean, CJ Hester's supposed to commit, I believe, July 1st, so we're still a little ways from him. Maybe he changes it up and feels good about Florida, jumps on board. Jamarian Gordon's a kid out of Alabama, depending – if they want to kind of give him the green light. I know it's a guy Florida really likes. He's an OV set for June 6th. Florida's his leader. Even back in the fall, he was saying Florida had the best chance of flipping him. He was a kid committed to Alabama and UCF at different portions of his recruitment. So I think that's a guy that comes to mind. But even Kiko Amala, that was one guy I thought going to the spring game. I know there's a lot of buzz, and someone asked me at Gators Online, is there anyone on this visitors list that you can see committing? And it was him. I just thought, Florida was in a good spot. I think it was visit number 4, IMG connection. I just thought maybe it's going to click this weekend. He pulls the trigger, and he didn't. So I think right now, I think you got to look at Malik Morris, Kiku Ama, CJ Hester, Jamarian Gordon. I don't think Janari Carr is going to commit anytime soon. I think he's going to take those series of OVs that we spoke about. So it's a weird thing, right? I mean, it's different than previous years where you have a who could be next to commit, and you have that one guy you can kind of point to right away. But right now, it's kind of a wait and see with a lot. And I think if this was like in maybe March or February, you feel a little bit better about it. But now that we're so close to OVs, one would think that a lot of these kids are just going to wait and take these OVs because we're so close to that month,
Yeah, for sure. 2 more, Corey, and I'll let you go, man. It just came through Gators Breakdown Plus. They knew I was recording this, so and this was a player I wanted to ask about too. Harrison Ford wanted to know Samorian Wingo, of course, right here from my neck of the woods. I'm here in Jacksonville. He's there in St. Augustine. We hadn't really talked wide receiver much this episode, and kind of seems to be the big name that's out there for Florida, especially with commitments going elsewhere that were big targets so far this spring for the Gators.
Yeah, so he just put out top 5, but I think, as we kind of said all along, I think he stays in state. I mean, obviously anything can happen, but Florida, Miami are the 2 schools we're focused on the most with him. A guy is near the very top of Billy Gonzalez's wish list, and even back in January when it was a contact period, it was the first stop for Gonzalez, and I think that was notable. And even the kid say, he goes, I wasn't too surprised. I'm grateful, but I'm not too surprised because our relationship is so strong. He attended almost every home game last year. Even when the 2025 class was in the spotlight, he was saying, man, I talked to Coach Billy all throughout the week. They want me. They said, hey, just let them know when you're ready, when he's ready, and he'll be a Gator. So, I mean, he's been viewed as a take for a long time now. And I think right now with his recruitment, you still got to feel good about where Florida stands. Very comfortable at Florida, was back on campus earlier this year. I think the main thing we got to look at is that relationship, like we said, with Coach Gonzalez. Coach Napier's involved too. Miami, I think the one thing you got to look at Miami too, he visited Miami earlier this year in the spring, and it was supposed to be a one-day visit, and he made it a whole weekend. And I think that kind of put Florida on notice that, this isn't going to be, an easy one as far as Florida might be the leader. But, him extending that visit to 3 to 4 days was very notable. And Miami did make up a lot of ground this spring. But, yeah, man, I think you got to look at Florida as having the slight edge over the Hurricanes right now. And I think it all kind of goes back to a relationship, Florida. And we talked about with other guys. We talked about Syracuse with CJ Hester, how they got involved with him early. This is kind of the same case with Florida and Wingo. Florida got in very early with him, and it's all kind of paying off. They offered him last summer after a camp, and it's been persistent ever since.
All right, Corey, last one, man. Thanks for hopping on. A top player that Florida may have a best shot with. There's several targets that we've talked about, and there's a lot in that top 150 range, but we're not really hearing a whole lot about, elites or, top of the class. Now, worth noting, Isaiah Williams is ranked 41st overall, so that's a pretty big get already that's in the class. But, anybody above that, any 5 stars, any of the, the big-time, big-name prospects Florida could be in the mix for.
Yeah, I think James Johnson, who's been on 3's number 1 D lineman, who's down at Miami Northwestern now. He's at North Fort Myers. This is a guy that Florida has loved for a while. I know before they even offered him, that was a kid you would hear around the facilities during visit weekends. You would hear coaches talking about him. And Georgia right now is number 1, but I think Florida could be number 2. I mean, it's another they've hosted him more than anyone. I think it's going to be interesting now that he's at Miami Northwestern. Maybe Miami moves up a little bit, moves up more with him. But I think, he was on three's number one defensive lineman in the last rankings update. And understandably so. He's a elite guy. He's not a 5-star yet, but I think as the rankings expand, as you know, Dave, how more 5-stars are given throughout the cycle towards the end, he's an elite guy that Florida is very heavy on. Braylon Womack, a safety that Florida really likes as well. Ohio State's in on him. Florida's in the top. Florida right now is in the top 4. Ohio State recently pulled the number 1. But, he's a guy that had a big visit, or 2 big visits early this year. It really kind of moved up his list. Vinny Sinceri is playing a huge role in that recruitment. Even when he was at Washington, he recruited him very hard. And that's arguably the number one reason why Florida has surged on his list. I think right now, he's 5-star number 1 safety in the country. I think there's obviously some room to make up, but I think after a strong OV, I think Florida could really potentially move into the driver's seat. So I think you look at those two, and I think Jake Krull, obviously an IMG Academy, a guy that's really climbed in the rankings, not a 5-star, but a top 50 overall prospect. His father graduated from Florida, a big-time edge prospect who is from Orlando, put up big numbers. I think believes Bishop Moore before he went to IMG, a very productive kid. But the thing with him is he's been very calculated. He said, hey, I'm going to take all these spring visits, which there's a lot of them, and then I'm going to decide who's going to get OVs after that. It would be a major shocker if Florida didn't get one, but he told me back in February that he thinks as far as culture, Florida fits him the best. And, that was his dream school growing up. And when I asked him what's important to him, he said culture. So you got to connect the dots and feel that Florida's in a great spot for him. I'm a very productive edge guy that speaks with Billy Napier and Coach Mike Pearson a number of times throughout the week. So I think those are the main guys. I mean, you can also go to Trenton Henderson, Pensacola Catholic, a guy that, I spoke to him earlier this week, has a top 10, but he said Florida's in that top tier. Not a 5-star again, but an elite 4-star. A guy could be a 5-star by the end of the cycle. A big edge prospect. So I think right now it's tough to tell. I think Braylon Womack, when it comes to star rankings, he's one that comes to mind. But James Johnson, he's the number 1 D lineman in the country. I think Florida has, Georgia's on top right now, but I think, there's no other school he's more familiar with than Florida, and I think that says a lot.
There we go. Plenty of time for some moving and shaking in that regard too, Corey. We know how fickle recruiting is, and it's just
definitely.
Seems that way ever more so now than it ever has been. So certainly a lot of storylines to follow, guys. If you want even more, Gators Online. You got Corey, you got Blake Alderman, you got Keith Niebuhr. There's really nowhere else you need to turn for recruiting because those guys have the super team over there at Gators Online. Corey, man, I can't thank you enough right here for giving a breakdown. Of course, right here on Gators Breakdown of Recruiting.
No, thank you. I'm always glad to jump on, Dave. Thanks for having me on.
All right, everybody. Corey Bender, Gators Online. Find him right there, and you can find him out there on social media as well.